one of the most diabolical murders in the history of America that became known as the crime of the century. This is the true story of Appalachia's most ruthless family. In 1938, East Tennessee was home to one of the most shocking crimes to ever take place. And suddenly, the manhunt was on for some of the most ruthless men to ever roam the hills of Appalachia. Buckle up for this incredible true story. Our story begins in Carter County, Tennessee, in 1934. A tall, good-looking young fella with a mysterious past has just rolled into the small mountain community of Hampton in search of a fresh start. The man's name is Arnold Tollett, who had up until now spent his life making and selling moonshine 225 miles away in Bledsoe County. However, with the Great Depression in full swing and the lingering effects of Prohibition, like so many other men, Arnold had made the move to East Tennessee in search of new opportunities. After all, several members of the Tallet family had already moved there a decade earlier and taken factory jobs in the bustling town of Elizabethton. And now they owned a general store and a large family farm. That's right. The future was full of promise. And combined with Arnold's outgoing personality, it took little time for him to fit right in this tight-knit community. Arnold's wife, Gladys, loved to socialize as much as her husband did, and soon the two began frequenting square dances that were hosted at various farmers' barns throughout Carter County. There, the couple made many friends as the fiddles stalled and the illegal liquor was consumed by the gallons. It was at one of these hoedowns that Arnold Tallet met a couple named Harmon and Pauline Gouja, who also loved to dance and party. Pauline was a stay-at-home mom with 3 young daughters, and Harmon, well, he had a good-paying factory job. Gouja was a businessman at heart, and he also owned a couple of gas stations in the area. Even better, he lived in a brand-new 6-room bungalow house. With so much in common between the two couples, it wasn't long before Arnold and his wife moved in with Harmon and Pauline. And just a few months later, Harmon and Arnold became business partners and opened a place called the Bluebird Tavern. It was Arnold's job to run the place, while Harmon was busy working his factory job and his gas stations. The Bluebird was a local dive place, selling food out the front door and, unbeknownst to the cops, moonshine out the back. And before long, business was so good that the partners needed a bigger supplier of that illicit liquor. It was then that Arnold and Harmon began traveling back to Tallet's old stomping grounds in Bledsoe County and transporting carloads of booze back to the Bluebird. Up until now, Gouja didn't really know who his partner was, or shall I say, who his family was. But he was about to find out. You see, the last name Tallet was one of the most feared names in this part of Tennessee. They were literally the first white men to ever settle the Sequatchie Valley after the natives were pushed out hundreds of years ago. And here, the Tallets had ruled moonshine, politics, and the law for generations. No one crossed them. And those that did soon found out why the locals referred to this county as Bloody Bledsoe. That's right, the Tollets still lived by the mountain code, an eye for an eye, and an attack on any single one of them was an attack on the entire family, and they would stop at nothing until a bloody price was extracted from their enemies. Simply put, the Tollets were the law of the land in Bloody Bledsoe, and they were led by Crave Tallet, who was Arnold's brother, and the clan included several henchmen and guns for hire that would carry out execution-style crimes anytime Crave Tallet felt the need to snuff out a potential rival. Men like Lester Church, White Tallet, Lee Walker, and Ulysses Wallen Each of these men were cold-blooded killers who had never once been convicted. And as for Harmon Gouget, well, Crave Tallet saw him as little more than a distributor of his blockade liquor operation. Before long, Harmon and Arnold were making weekly trips back and forth between the two counties, running liquor where huge amounts of cash were being exchanged. And when you're playing with fire, it's only a matter of time before you get burned. And although Gouget didn't know it, all hell was about to break loose, and he was about to find out just how ruthless those Tollets really were.
Hey guys, JD Phillips here from the Appalachian Storyteller. Today's video is sponsored by tnnursery.net.
Family owned and operated in the heart of Appalachia, TN Nursery ships beautiful plants and trees all across America. Perennials, ferns, vines, trees, and much, much more. TN Nursery's plants can be found in some of the most beautiful spaces, such as the Washington Monument and Arlington National Cemetery. And now they can be in yours. Click the link in the description to shop America's favorite garden shop. For quality landscaping trees and plants, get 15% off of your order by using promo code STORYTELLER at checkout. By late 1936, trouble began between Harmon Gouget and Arnold Tollett. After several heated disagreements about money, Arnold and his wife moved out of the Gouget home. And now, to make matters worse, business was slow at the Bluebird Tavern. But everything came to a head when over 100 gallons of whiskey mysteriously disappeared from the business. Both Tallet and Gouget accused one another and nearly came to blows before they finally stopped communicating with one another by Christmas of that year. New Year's of 1937 came and went, and tempers were still flaring between the men, who still hadn't spoken to one another. Finally, on January 30th, Arnold's wife gave birth to their first child, and Tallet, well, he needed money to pay that doctor bill. He searched Carter County all day, looking for his former partner, before confronting him at a gas station in Hampton. And from the very beginning, the conversation was heated, with Tallet demanding money and Gouget claiming that he didn't owe him a penny. And what happens next is still debated to this very day. Well, because as they say, dead men don't talk. So there's only one side of the story. According to Gouget, he tried to walk away from Tallet, but Tallet, well, he pulled a knife and tried to stab the businessman, who, in self-defense, pulled his pistol and shot Arnold Tallet dead. Gouget walked right in the store, put his gun on the counter, and called the sheriff and told him his version of the story, and then he was arrested and released on a $10,000 bond. Harmon Gouget would have to stand trial for the murder of Arnold Tallet. When word of the killing of a Tallet reached Bloody Bledsoe, the cry for revenge was immediate. The audacity to kill Crave Tallet's brother could not and would not go unpunished. And even though the crime happened over 200 miles away, it wouldn't be enough distance to protect Harmon Gouget or his family in what was to become a mafia-style hit that would shock the entire nation. While the wheels of justice slowly grinded along, with delay after delay in Harmon's trial, the Tollets fumed as several months went by, and Harmon Gouget was still a free man, and worse yet to the Tollets, he was still breathing. Crave Tallet summoned all his men in Bloody Bledsoe, including the county sheriff, and they devised a plan to take justice into their own hands. Many of those in the meeting suggested that they should simply just drive to Carter County and shoot Gouget in the head and be done with it. But killing him wasn't enough for Crave. He wanted to send a message that the Tollets were untouchable anywhere in Tennessee. And with that in mind, on November 7th, 1937, after 10 months of waiting on the court system, the Tollets took action. Crave's top men, White Tallet, Church Lester, and Lee Walker, and the sheriff's son, Ulysses, decided to pay Harmon Gouget a little visit. Now, the roads in rural Tennessee back in those days were little more than back roads, and driving 225 miles, well, that took all night. Finally, in the early hours of the morning, the quartet arrived in Hampton, where they parked a block away from the Gouja home. And under the cover of darkness, they made their way into his garage, where they found his 1937 Chevrolet car. And they strapped 6 sticks of dynamite underneath the driver's seat and wrapped the fuse around his muffler before retreating into the darkness of the night. 2 days later, Harmon was driving his automobile, completely unaware of the explosives strapped under his seat, when he pulled into a gas station to use the restroom. And moments later, a blast shockwave blew the bathroom door right off its hinges, and was so powerful that it blew the windows out of the store. Pieces of the car's engine rained down from the sky for over a half minute. There was nothing left of the automobile, and it looked like it had been chewed up by a junkyard car crusher. He had escaped death by a mere 15 seconds. But one thing was now clear. Harmon Gouja was a man marked for death.
Give someone you love the gift of old-fashioned storytelling. 4 books for the young and old alike that will make your heart smile. Click the link below to order your copy of the Appalachian Storyteller today.
He became consumed by fear, constantly looking over his shoulder. He even moved out of his home and rented a room at a local hotel under an anonymous name. And he would only visit his wife and children at his home during daylight hours, always dressed in a disguise. While threats were delivered by phone and mail every other day, Gouja was completely paranoid. And the police, well, they could do nothing to protect him. And as bad as things were for Harmon Gouja, I tell you right now, the worst was yet to come. Back in Bloody Bledsoe, Crave Tallet called a meeting with the most powerful men in the county and told them of his intention to take care of Harmon Gouja once and for all. Even the Bledsoe County Sheriff was in the meeting with his son, Ulysses, who would once again be part of the men to carry out the plan. It all began on January 6th, when White Tallet and Ulysses drove to Chattanooga and purchased 2 rolls of waterproof fuses from a hardware store. And then that night, the same 4 men responsible for bombing his car were on the road to Carter County again. The 4 men drove all night, fueled by whiskey and revenge, until they arrived at Gouja's home, completely unaware that he had been hiding out in a hotel. And using a small window, they crawled into the basement of the home and strategically placed an entire case of dynamite under where they believed Harmon to be sleeping. They ran 2 fuses all the way out to the edge of the street and struck a match. The slow burning of the waterproof fuses had begun at a speed of a foot per minute. And then the 4 men hopped in their getaway car and sped back towards the safety of Bledsoe County. "I tell you, boys, somebody's gonna get blown all to hell," one of the men shouted as the car sped away. However, unbeknownst to the outlaws, Harmon wasn't in that bed. Instead, it was his wife and 3 young daughters who were laid sound asleep. And an hour later, one of the most horrific crimes in American history was unleashed. An entire case of dynamite exploded and blew the entire house to shreds. The concussion from the explosion blew neighboring homes' windows and walls out, and even their occupants clear out of their beds and onto the floor. Harmon's brother was living next door, and as soon as he recovered from being blown across his bedroom, he looked out his window and saw the carnage. He quickly ran to Harmon's house and began looking through the rubble. There he found Pauline, bloodied and unconscious, with her entire chest crushed, but somehow she was alive. He quickly scooped her up and put her in his car to take her to the hospital, when it dawned on him that his car too might be strapped with dynamite. And by now, half-dressed neighbors were arriving on the scene, where one of them rushed Pauline to the hospital, where she was immediately operated on to try and save her life. Meanwhile, rescuers frantically searched the twisted piles of lumber when they heard a faint cry and began desperately digging. And moments later, the remains of 6-year-old Roma Jean and 9-year-old Sonia were found. and minutes later, 8-year-old Lorraine was pulled from the wreckage before she too succumbed to her injuries. Word of the explosion spread like wildfire over the radio, and by daybreak, the entire nation had learned of the shocking tragedy on the front pages of newspapers. Police didn't know exactly who committed the crime, but they knew one thing: whoever it was belonged to the Tallet family. By the time the killers arrived back in Bloody Bledsoe, word of the explosion had already reached there, and the Carter County Sheriff had already contacted the Bledsoe County Sheriff and demanded for him to arrest the Tallet boys for questioning. However, the Bledsoe County Sheriff refused to do so, and instead, he met again with Crave Tallet to help him craft an alibi. During this meeting, a local car dealership owner spoke up and said, "I know where you were last night, Mr. Tallet, don't you?" To which Mr. Crave replied, "Well, no, I don't. Why don't you tell me?" "Oh, sure you do. You were in that hotel room that I had booked last night. You and your men were sound asleep when all of this here happened." The utter wickedness to take the lives of 3 innocent children shocked the nation, and the Tennessee governor offered a $2,500 reward for any and all information on who was responsible. And then he sent the best detectives that Tennessee had to offer to investigate the crime. The detectives quickly descended on the scene and began collecting evidence. Among this was a piece of the fuse used in the explosion, and when they placed it under a microscope, they found the name of the store where it had been purchased in Chattanooga. The net began to slowly close in on the Tallet family, and at one point, authorities had 8 people in custody, including Ulysses Wallen and Lee Walker. And those cops, well, they used aggressive interrogation techniques, to say the least, such as beating and kicking a man, as well as using a hot stove to burn the handcuffed suspect each time he gave an answer that they didn't believe. Yet, the Tallet family would not break. By Sunday, less than 48 hours since the tragedy, the entire nation mourned as all 3 of the little girls' funerals were held at the First Baptist Church that was overwhelmed with over 10,000 people from all across America pouring into the little churchyard, where they watched as 3 tiny caskets were carried into the chapel. All of the roads in and out of Hampton were completely jammed as more than 12,000 cars had descended on the small community to get a glimpse of the explosion scene, where state police had to be called in to maintain a perimeter on the crime scene. It became impossible for the hearse to transport the caskets to the cemetery, so their burial had to be postponed until the next day, where finally they were buried on a tall hill outside of town. Schools were canceled, so all the children of the tight-knit town could attend the service. The hill was so steep that no car could climb it, and instead, the 3 caskets were placed on a sled and pulled by a horse to the summit, where they were finally laid to rest. Sadly, the girl's mother was still fighting for her life in the hospital and hadn't even been told of her daughter's deaths until after they were buried. Suddenly, the cries for mountain justice grew louder from locals who were tired of waiting on investigators as thousands of men descended on the jail. It was then that the investigators decided to use this to their advantage and play a little good cop, bad cop, telling Lee Walker that they would simply unlock the door and let those mountaineers string him up. Or, if he preferred, he could be strapped in the electric chair. After all, detectives had proof that the hotel alibi was bogus. Since there was only one small 3-quarter bed in the hotel, it was impossible for 3 or 4 men to sleep on. And they even had testimony from the hotel clerk that when they inspected the room the next day, the sheets were still perfectly laid. It was clear no one had slept in that room. Plus, they had proof of when and where the dynamite fuse was bought for the crime. Lee Walker understood mountain justice, since it was the code that he had always lived by. And the thought of those angry men being unleashed on him, it terrified him. Detectives gave the suspect a cigarette and offered him a hot meal, and then they softened up a bit. Hey, it's okay. We're all on your side. All you have to do is just come clean and tell us who did this. That's the only way you won't hang or fry for this. We can get you a reduced sentence. Finally, after days of nonstop interrogations, Lee Walker admitted to the entire crime. And the very next day, faced with Lee's confession, Ulysses Wallen did the same thing. Warrants were issued for the arrest of Church Lester and the mastermind, Crave Tallet. Well, Lester voluntarily turned himself in. However, the Bledsoe County Sheriff refused to arrest Crave Tallet. And finally, a warrant had to be issued to arrest the Bledsoe County Sheriff himself before finally all suspects were in custody. The trial for the killings of the three girls began on February 22, 1938, as the nation hung on every word through daily reports in newspapers and radios. Thousands of people from across America descended on the courthouse to witness the spectacle as a circus-like atmosphere erupted. On one hand, there were armed guards stationed throughout the entire courtyard. All the while, snake oil salesmen peddled balsam oil and sassafras root and all sorts of healing concoctions. Jugglers and performers who swallowed swords performed, while children sold sandwiches and soda. And the prettiest girls that Carter County had to offer sold cigars and kisses to the wealthy for $1 each. Inside the packed courtroom, the prosecution laid out its case before a gun-toting audience, while loudspeakers broadcasted every word to the thousands who were gathered on the courthouse lawn. The Tollett family seemed amused by the entire proceedings. No one in the history of their family had ever been convicted in bloody Bledsoe, yet this was Carter County. Surely their power couldn't save them this time. Finally, after a 9-day trial, the fate of the Tollett family was in the hands of the jury, who took more than 2 days to deliberate before returning with a verdict. The entire courtroom was packed with armed guards, including 5 shotgun-toting highway patrolmen, each stationed with his gun behind the head of a defendant in case members of the audience pulled their weapons and tried to free them. The courtroom was so silent, all you could hear was the shuffling of boots and the cocking of pistols, as the nation held its breath, waiting on the head juror to read the verdict aloud. Would justice be served, or would the Tallet family get away with this unspeakable horror? Both Ulysses Walling and Lee Walker received 21-year sentences to the notorious Brushy Mountain Prison in exchange for their confessions. However, both men were released just 11 years later. Meanwhile, Church Lester and White Tallet became the first men to ever be sentenced to death by the electric chair in Carter County, Tennessee. Yet, stunningly, the mastermind behind the entire plan, Crave Tallet, was found not guilty and walked out of court a free man. However, the story doesn't end there. You see, Harmon Gouja still had to stand trial for the killing of Arnold Tallet, the crime that started all of this. And just a short time later, in the very same courtroom where the Tallet clan stood trial for the murder of Gouja's daughters, Gouja himself faced a murder charge. However, the jury was still feeling sympathetic for what had happened to his 3 daughters, and they took a mere 65 minutes to acquit him of all charges. As for Church Lester, after being locked away less than 2 weeks awaiting his death sentence, one morning as the jailers took the condemned man his breakfast, they found him hanging by his own belt in his cell. That left only one man, White Tallet, to pay for these horrible crimes. But in the weeks leading up to his execution, hundreds of Tennessee politicians and powerful men began to petition the governor to pardon him. The governor was under intense pressure from all his political donors. But would he really forgive this horrendous crime? Finally, the night before the execution was scheduled to be carried out at dawn, the governor had had enough, and he booked a room at a local hotel and stationed a small army of highway patrolmen outside his door, armed with shotguns to protect him. And there he vowed to stay, isolated in the room until after judgment was carried out. And this was a good thing that he had security, because also in that hotel, just down the hallway, was the entire Tallet family, led by none other than Crave Tallet himself, who had vowed to kill the governor if he didn't commute the sentence. While this standoff was taking place in the hotel, back at the prison, White Tallet had finished eating his final meal of fried chicken and watermelon, and now was being led in chains to old Sparky. There, his wife and children were among those in attendance to witness this event. And as the electric cap was strapped on his head, Tallet's 14-year-old son called out from the crowd, "Take it like a man, Dad." To which White Tallet replied, "I can take it. Meet me up there." And a moment later, the switch was thrown and White Tallet was cast into the unknowns of the other side of eternity. As for Crave Tallet, the mastermind of it all, well, he walked away scot-free. He truly was a man so powerful that his kinfolk were willing to kill or be killed for him. And the law, well, they were powerless to stop him. Wow, what a story. What about you, my friend? Do you think justice was really served? I look forward to your discussions in the comments below. Thanks so much for watching this episode, and as always, be sure to like and subscribe for more true stories from Appalachia's past.